begin. So, we're here in Barcelona, Steve Hassan and Paul
Lennon.
And we just finished the conference, the international conference sponsored by a number of organizations, European as well as the ICSA. And Paul, you gave a presentation which unfortunately I missed, so I apologize. But I'm really grateful that you are taking a few moments to sit with me and tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came to even come to this conference. You were involved with an organization?
Yes, I was. I was with the Legionaries of Christ, a Catholic religious order, a member for 23 years. And actually, I kind of prided myself on being one of the first Irish members of the Legionaries, because the Legionaries were founded in Mexico by a Mexican priest. And
what was the name of the founder?
Father Maciel. Father Maciel was the person who founded this. And I think what happened, I was in the order for several years, and after I left, I felt really bad. I was in a crisis after I left, and it needed some psychotherapy, some healing. And then I started trying to making sense of what had happened to me and what other members had experienced. And we were looking for paradigms or some way of explaining that after we got through all the pain of the healing, of course, to some degree.
And I'm sure there's a long
story.
God,
that's
about
a whole other story.
Okay.
But anyway,
but hopefully you'll write a book one day about it.
Yeah, well, I did write my little memoir, about, and I'll put that towards the end because the title is a little bit shocking, so I'll leave that to the end. But I think some of the guys I spoke with were saying the idea of this felt like a dysfunctional family. Now these again, we were not into psychological paradigms or sociological paradigms. But one of the guys probably read a book or something. This sounds like a dysfunctional family. And then afterwards, I don't know how, I got in touch with ICSA and the whole idea of cult or cultic organizations. Some of us started to formulate the idea that maybe there were some strange elements in this. And that was very unusual for us as Catholics to even countenance the idea that there could be such a thing inside the Catholic Church, because as Catholics we're aware that cults exist outside the Church. And normally the cult has been an idea of a doctrinal thing, a thing about doctrine. They have a false doctrine, therefore they're a cult or a sect.
Right.
Normally they're called.
And not necessarily the behaviors.
Exactly. So, and I think we are still trying to educate people about this possibility that we're talking here about behaviors, that we're talking about systems. We're talking about methodology is the word that we have used. We found the word to be kind of compatible to what people would understand, which would mean the method you use to recruit people, to bring in members, the method that you have in your training of members, which of course in our case are seminarians, not just any members, but future priests. This is very important. So in that sense, then you come in touch with the whole Catholic Church, the idea of the hierarchy of bishops who are supposed to oversee what is happening, and ultimately
checks and balances, supposedly, but of course we've heard about the terrible sexual abuse problem that's existed over decades, but hopefully the Church is taking steps to make sure that that people who have problems are not put in places where they can abuse
others.
Others.
Well, that comes right into it in the sense that, in that sense, the Legion of Christ has become the poster boy, not in the good sense of the word, but it has become an example of this bad stuff, because there had always been accusations against the founder. of sexually abusing his seminarians.
Really?
Yes, and these accusations never really got very far because the accusers were nobody. They were just ex-members. They were just throwaways. And so those accusations never really got very far. And there was a lot of control until two Catholic journalists investigated the order and the founder, and they came up with an article in America. That was the first time that this idea of sexual abuse inside a Catholic order, or inside this specific Catholic order, was made public. Because before that, it had all been handled within the confines of the Catholic Church.
That's so interesting to me. Because I live in Boston, and that was my impression. The Boston Globe was the ones who broke the story, but now I hear you say, no, there are Catholic reporters who are...
There are Catholic reporters, and then of course it's hard to understand the Catholic Church because it's so complex. And you were talking about the diocese, in other words, priests who work actually face-to-face in parishes and say Mass and do all these things that we Catholics do, whereas there are religious orders or special groups of dedicated people within the Church who kind of run parallel to your padre on the street. And this is what it's hard for people to understand. They do have heard about the Jesuits and the Franciscans, about these. The Legion of Christ is a very new order. A very new and shining order which was recruiting people tremendously strongly, having been very successful, grew exponentially in 40 years, has maybe about 800 priest members, ordained ministers, has 2,500 devoted or consecrated members, and so we've got great numbers within the...
So let me just ask you a question as someone really ignorant about the workings and the structure of the Catholic Church. Forgive me. But when you say an order is created how? By a papal decree, I mean? Or how does that work?
Well, an order is created by a charismatic figure coming into the Church and feeling he or she has a mission to do something specific. For example, in the case of the Franciscans, it would be, St. Francis was inspired to live the poverty of Jesus, the first Christian. And that was their specific thing. And he wanted his people to do that, and so he founded this. He did need, ultimately, he would need the approval of the hierarchy, of the structure, and of the Pope in order to be approved, to be officially approved.
So in the case of the Legionnaires of Christ, was that approval given at some point?
It was given, and
approximately what year, do you know?
Well, it's given gradually because it starts at a local level and then it starts going up the ladder to the very top. So he founded the order in 1941 in Mexico, and then he received, you might say, provisional approval at the local level in 48, which was extremely fast even for Catholics. And then say about 1965 or so, he would have received approval from the Vatican with a special decree saying this is a bona fide religious order. Now you can imagine that, so this order is just going wonderfully, but these accusations against the founder are undercutting this. I mean, this is an ugly, shall we say, stain in the Legion, and these accusations are running.
So when you say words like shining and wonderful, there's kind of quotes around that.
Well, I've used that a lot because I keep telling people, and it's just a very hackneyed phrase, all that glitters is not gold. So you kind of say that. And I think that the public in general continues, and in our case, Catholics continue to be impressed by appearances. And how to go...
That's your opinion.
That's my strong opinion. That's my strong opinion. Even though we're supposed to be spiritual people and we're supposed to be looking beyond appearances, beyond the face, as the Bible says. Look, the Lord looks into the heart, doesn't is not content with appearances. Even so, I think as human beings we are impressed by that. And so when Catholics see these very young priests, these very good-looking priests, these very eloquent priests, these very successful priests, young people want to join this order.
I see.
It's just like any other group.
So is it?
Excuse me.
I don't want to put you on. I don't want to get you to say something you're not comfortable saying. But would you say that you are still a Catholic?
Oh yes, yes. I think because we have to. When you come, I think when you come out of a group which is so intense. And you may feel that you've suffered a lot in this group, or you've been mistreated in some way. I think the temptation is to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's a whole other story about what you do, and I think it's true for all mainstream religions. What do you do when you've been in a group which was affiliated to a church or something, and then what do you do when you left that group? Do you leave everything? You know, do you say, now I'm an atheist, I don't want to have anything to do with this again? And I think some members go there. I think some members, so I think the ex-members, it's a marvelous study, which I personally am very interested in. If you want to say, what can I preserve or what can I conserve of my original faith, of my original belief, after I've been through such a threshing machine, if you want to push it. What is left of our, and this is very interesting. I want to be very practical right now. I'm here with an ex-member, another ex-member, very young person, and he wants to go to Mass. He is a Catholic, he's a practicing Catholic, and he wants to go to Mass. And my wife wants to go with him. So that's where we are. But what happened, going back to the accusations, I think the accusations that dogged the founder finally came to a head because these articles appeared by the journalist. Then a book was written called Vows of Silence, which...
Who wrote that? Do you remember?
Yes, Jerry Renner and Jason Berry. Jason Berry already had a kind of a background in abuse by priests. He already had done a study on this area. So he interviewed the victims, Father Maciel's victims, gentlemen now in their 60s and so forth. And he was convinced that their testimonies were truthful.
And I seem to remember looking at a DVD.
Yes, and then there's a DVD. He made a DVD recently, which is probably still out there.
We'll put links, to describe that.
He called it Vows of Silence, and that's that. And then he did the video, and then I think the next thing was that somehow or other, a series of circumstances, the church itself, the hierarchy of the church, very recently, about 2005, 2006, decided to investigate these accusations, and they did that precisely because some of the members, some of those who had been victims of Father Maciel, went to the Vatican. They hired, shall we say, a Vatican lawyer, because you have to do that. You have to go to the Vatican tribunals to have some clout. And so they went the official channel, and it went to one of the departments in the Vatican where Cardinal Ratzinger was head. At that time, the current Pope, he was head of that department at that time. And just as Pope John Paul II was dying, he dispatched a prosecutor to interview the victims. And that is what happened. The prosecutor brought the findings back to the Vatican. The findings were in favor of the victims, but Father Maciel was not really chastised. He was very lightly chastised.
Is he still alive?
No, he died about 4 years ago.
In what year?
Oh, jeekers, that's it. I think it's 2008.
2008.
I think it's 2008.
We're tired.
We're tired. We're tired.
Conference.
Yes, and I think the latest episodes in the story of the Legion of Christ have happened very quickly because there was the investigation by the prosecutor. Then the prosecutor brings a report back to Rome, and by Catholic standards, this is very quick. Because usually, the Catholic Church says we've been around for 2,000 years. We don't do things very quickly here. But this was pretty fast.
But this was in the context of all the
I think of the lawsuits and the
publicity that was bad.
The lack of prestige for the Catholic priesthood, for the Catholic priests, for the Catholic ministers, and reflecting poorly on the hierarchy, on the bishops, and ultimately reflecting poorly on the Vatican. So I think it behooved the Vatican to move swiftly in this case. And so after that, then Father Maciel, at that time very old person, nevertheless senior gentleman, he was asked to. You're
being very kind to call him a gentleman.
Yes.
Having been in the Moonies myself, I have a hard time calling my former leader even a reverend, since he never even was ordained. But I'm congratulating you on your...
Well, God knows what we call him in private.
I see.
But I think he had seen some of the smoke appearing on the horizon himself, and he stepped down as a leader.
Or maybe he was instructed to privately.
That is true. He may have been told that something was in the works, and he stepped down discreetly as leader from the Legionaries.
So the order continues.
Oh, the order continues very, very radiantly in its own way. So skipping along quickly, the investigation happened. Father Maciel was given a tap on the hands. He was told to be quiet, not to say mass, not to practice the sacrament, not to administer the sacraments, and then he died shortly after that. The important thing is that after he died, all of a sudden there's stories about him having affairs or having personal relationships with women surfaced. And
women as well as men?
Women as well as men, and that he had children.
Really?
Yes. And this was
Is that documented, or is that
documented?
hearsay?
No longer documented.
No longer documented, or it is
sorry,
documented?
no longer hearsay. Excuse me. No longer rumor. The strange thing is that it never was a rumor because it was revealed by the legionaries themselves. And
in what context did they reveal that?
That is totally unknown. We don't know why they reveal that. But all of a sudden, out of the blue, a year or so after Father Maciel dies, it is revealed that he had a wife or a lover.
So it's probably a PR move to, try to get ahead of the negativity.
That's what's.
But let's not speculate.
That's okay. That's a fair speculation because nobody knows why the Legion leadership chose to reveal this to the public in general, and that he had a lover, wife, something, and he had one daughter, and they were living in Madrid, and that he had been paying out of the Legion funds for their apartment in Madrid for years and years and years.
So is it fair for me to surmise that you, a former member of 23 years, would feel pretty betrayed and traumatized by your experiences?
Well, already I had come to some skepticism of Father Maciel, of the real Father Maciel. I was never one of his greatest devotees, which was probably an advantage for me. So I never got all that close to Father Maciel. So I was always somewhat judgmental about him. So for me it kind of confirmed my worst doubts or my worst fears. I already believed that he had sexually abused his own seminarians. This for me was the most horrendous thing that he could have done. However, for the public and for Catholics, for some Catholics, the thing about him having maybe a wife or sexual relationships with a woman was beyond the pale, was too much, and the fact of having engendered, having given birth to a daughter, and then in Mexico it appears that another lady comes on the scene who says that he had two more sons with her. So the whole thing starts to unravel in a terribly.
So let's take a break for a second and just think. You just did a presentation at the conference. Is it possible to just summarize some of what the message is that you want to get out? And I want to not forget to mention that I just learned that you've gotten your professional licensure as a counselor in the state of Virginia.
Yes.
And that you're involved with a support group of former members
called Regain.
Regain, and the website is
simply regainnetwork.org.
Okay.
2 N's in the middle, Regain Network.
Okay, if I remember, we'll repeat this at the end.
Yeah,
but
get
so
a little spiel out.
if you don't mind just summarizing, like, what did you present for those of us who missed it?
It's all the same thing. It all comes into the same thing. People were interested in knowing about the Vatican intervention into the Legion of Christ and where that intervention stood. So that's kind of confirming then what happened. Ultimately, the Vatican named a team of visitors then to go beyond the founder and to find out if maybe he had infected the order, to put it very bluntly. So then a team of bishops was sent inside the Legion to try to figure out what was going on inside. Not just the founder, but that if some of his ideas had infected this order that was now already approved by the Church. So it was a very unusual thing to do.
So we talked about some of the founder's inappropriate sexual behaviors, but now you've mentioned some of his ideas that may have infected. Could you just tell me what you mean by that a little bit?
Well, I mean, if he was, big question, if he was such a master of deceit, could he have transmitted that to the leadership, present leadership in the Legion? Like
a version of what the Moonies did of heavenly deception, that if you're doing it for God, it's okay to lie because you know what God wants better than everyone else, and that kind of notion, you mean?
Yes, and I think what you have said is very worthy of a lot of attention for people who would watch this video, and even coming at it, from a Catholic point of view, or from any kind of a religious point of view, that people are just not simply aware that this very same thing can happen in very religious or very holy context. Because we Catholics, we're not only religious, we are sometimes considered holy. And Father Maciel was a holy man. And I was doing the devil's work by questioning him.
Devil with quotation marks.
Exactly, please, yes. But
like I was the devil for criticizing Moon because he claimed he was the Messiah, and I said he wasn't, he was a liar. And he too was sexually inappropriate, according to former victims and people who were involved. It's interesting how power corrupts. And when people get to that level of authority where they claim to know what God wants, they do all kinds of abusive behaviors on others.
And I'm just noticing that I haven't let you talk a lot.
No. This is your interview, but I really wanted to be able to sit down with you and kind of capture the moment, because certainly, at least in my scanning the newspapers, the Catholic Church and abuse is still very much in the news. And the idea that victims should come forward, even if the abuse took place decades ago, that the law recognizes that the statute of limitations in many cases does not apply when there's abusive, mental techniques applied and such. And you speaking at this conference of basically former cult members and experts on abusive, manipulative sects, I just am curious about your impression as you listen to presentations by former members of Scientology, Children of God, the Brethren, the Moonies. Does anything resonate in terms of your own personal experience?
Yes, everything, a lot of things resonate. As I say, as a Catholic, this was something that I would never associate with the Catholic Church. These were the others. These were those weird people, you know.
You mean other groups?
Other groups. Well, whoever, you know, poor unfortunates that belong to these other groups, and I would never just put myself in the same basket as these other people. But we've had to maybe come to that realization, that awareness that the parallels were very, very strong, and that the idea of that we had been in a cult-like situation just like these other ex-members. It has dawned on us very slowly, and I think even so there's a lot of resistance to think that, and I think the present investigation and the present reform of the legionaries still has a long way to go, because it is so hard for priests, for Catholics in general, for the hierarchy to understand that maybe perhaps there is more than just sinfulness, maybe much more than just sexual abuse or somebody giving rein to their sexual urges, that there are other things, that there are other forms of manipulation which go beyond this.
This is really important.
See, this is the message that I think that, you know, is important to put out there, that it's not just people doing bad things, that a system could exist. And
if I may interrupt and just say that for me as a believer in God, I'm Jewish, but I respect Christians and all the major religions and alternative religions, but for me and for us, I'll speak collectively, the idea that God created us each as unique spiritual beings in his image, and gave us free will. And however you understand the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, God didn't make them slaves or commit, make them obedient. He told them to be obedient, and they disobeyed. And even Almighty God didn't interfere with that free will choice. And for me, with 36 years of reflection after coming out of the Unification Church organization, it just strikes me that when any institution says we are doing God's will, but then does practices that undermines individuality and free will, and uses deception or manipulation or behavior control to make people obedient, kind of mindlessly obedient, to surrender their ability to ask questions, it's contradictory to God's plan. That's my point of view on it.
Yes, and I agree, and I thoroughly agree. I think one of the things that happens when you leave a group like this, that you have to, you're going to question very much your own belief, and you're going to see the communalities that you're talking about. What's the basic thing here? Do I still believe in God? Who is Jesus for me now as a Christian? I think we should talk about these things even more freely. And
ultimately people can have a relationship with God. And if there's a human being that's interfering with that connection with God, that sometimes it's okay to question the person or the institution and keep your faith, at least my personal opinion, to not give up the baby with the bathwater and lose your spirituality. I know a lot of atheists and humanists are going to hate me for saying this, but that's okay. Because it's my faith, it's my belief. You
make your own choice. I think one of the things that Father Maciel, of course, he created the Legionnaires. Well, if you're a Legionnaire, that means something. You're very militaristic, so there's a lot of discipline. It's very, very disciplined. Father Maciel, actually, let's put it out there. He thought he wanted the Legionaries to be the new Jesuits. He thought that the Jesuits were just gone down the tubes. They were too liberal.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, they were not doing the right thing. The Jesuits were too liberal, and so he had the legionaries, and he thought they were going to be they may think that they are the new Jesuits that the Church needs for the 21st century, with new forms of action, with new forms of activity. But going back to the good old Jesuits, Father Maciel was very big into obedience, just like as the founder of the Jesuits. Saint Ignatius of Loyola was very strong into obedience, and Father Maciel, when he described our obedience, it was to be heroic. Obedience. We had to obey our superiors heroically, even if they asked us to do heroic things. And he also had a clause about it being blind and unquestioning. Now, of course, he wrote that in Spanish, obediencia ciega, which means blind obedience. When, of course, he came to the United States and founded in the United States, he changed that, he nuanced that a little bit, because Americans are not really big into blind obedience. So he changed that to motivated obedience. But it was the same thing.
But was it also secretive?
Yes.
Wasn't there like things inside that even other Catholics shouldn't be told about?
Yes.
I found was really interesting.
Yes, he created a private vow never to criticize your superior.
That sounds like many other groups that I deal with.
Now, the interesting thing is that after the Vatican investigation and interventions, it seems that the Vatican kicked that out. Kicked out the private vow, which he had created maybe to protect himself, because he was afraid that he would be criticized again. But so we've come full circle. That's where we are. We're in the news. The legionaries are in the news because right now the apostolic delegate appointed by the Pope is still with the legionaries, and he has decided to draw up 3 special commissions to reform the order from the inside. There has been no outside observers. There has been no independent investigation. It has all been done by the Church itself.
That's kind of scary to me. And one last thing as we wrap up, you mentioned this morning at breakfast that you had actually been threatened with a lawsuit or sued?
There was, yes. I think it may have come to the attention maybe of even some bishops, or maybe the hierarchy itself, that some lawyers representing the Legion of Christ had sued me and my little organization in 2007 or something like that. And this was, I think, was very unusual for that to happen, for a religious order.
It must have been shocking for
you. I was certainly shocked. I think...
and you were sued for what exactly?
I think it was the whole idea that I had taken certain you might say, secret documents, or perhaps certain proprietary documents they were called, and that I had made them public without permission of the organization.
Really?
So, yes, and this was it was a very clever lawsuit in the civil court in Virginia, in the city of Alexandria.
Civil court.
So it was done through civil court. So it was not a question of freedom of expression or anything like that. It was a very specific tenant. You might say very abstruse or obscure, very obscure tenet of Virginia law, which was looked into to accuse us of stealing these personal letters of Father Maciel, for example, and his institution, and wanting to make them public.
It reminds me of former Scientologist friends of mine who took the secret teachings of Scientology and put it on the internet, and they were sued for copyright violation, which was basically Scientology's effort, in my opinion, to do information control, because they charge a lot of money for people to go up the bridge, they call the bridge to total freedom, and get access to this information and such. Of course, the former members weren't trying to make money off of sharing these documents, they just wanted to warn the public. But the group basically used copyright law, won the lawsuit against the former members, thinking they would be able to suppress the information publicly, and not realizing that in the Netherlands that they are much more thoughtful about protecting the public good.
Oh.
So all of these documents that were basically certified as Scientology's secret teachings are now on the internet.
Oh my goodness.
Based in the Netherlands,
Yes.
and so Scientology lost that.
Mm-hmm.
It won the battle, but lost the war in terms of
Yeah.
information control. So when you tell me that they were trying to sue you for sharing some documents that prove some of his improprieties, I presume, it just reminds me of that. I don't know what was in the Catholic Church's mind when they were doing this lawsuit, but is the lawsuit still outstanding?
No, and there again, as a good Catholic, I have to correct you that it was not really the Catholic Church that brought this lawsuit against me, but the Legionaries of Christ.
So it was, it
particular
was
order,
a recognized order,
the order exactly
of
the Catholic Church that brought a lawsuit against one of their former members. No, we were able to reach a settlement, and I think in that sense, I can commend the Legion. In that sense, for even though they sued me, then we came to an amicable settlement, you might say, and we didn't have to pay any more expenses than our lawyers. Thank goodness, there was no more money.
They should have
involved.
paid for your lawyers.
But we scrambled around. It was one of the most harrowing years of my life, when I had to scramble around looking for money to pay the lawyer. And but there again, beautiful things happen in terrible circumstances, and these anonymous people, Catholics, came out of the woodwork and sent me little donations, and these little donations amounted to $38,000, which was enough for me to pay my lawyer. The Legion relented, shall we say, in its lawsuit at that time, for whatever reasons.
They probably rightfully realized that they were going to make more bad attention on themselves.
Maybe.
When you file a lawsuit, it becomes public, and then it doesn't look good that you're bringing a lawsuit against some of your former members. And, you know, frankly, Scientology, in my opinion, abused the legal system so much that eventually the judges in the United States at least became, you know, just really understood the doctrine of fair game, the idea that you could lie and steal and trick, even though Scientology officially says they stopped the policy. We have former leaders who've left who say, oh no, it's still going on. But the point is the legal process is I think groups are using it less because they realize with the internet it can be a lot of bad PR, and it could bring members and other ex-members and victims forward, and they don't want that, so it's better to settle and, you know, hush it up. But you still are involved with RegainNetwork.org.
Yes, still with them. So it's a very small organization, really. You know, I'm of no pretensions. I haven't been able to personally work or therapeutically with anybody because I did not have a proper license. So basically, I've just been trying to put the word out. I try to connect people.
Kind of as a consultant.
Kind of consultant kind of thing, mostly refer people. Try to build some liaisons or some relationships with different groups. Make people aware that there are some experts in the field who might be able to help them as families. They don't need to come to me. There are certain experts or people out there who can help them when the families are suffering so much because of their children being in the groups. And I think this has been a common thread, I think, all down the years with groups or high pressure groups or whatever we want to call them, that the parents are the ones who suffer terribly.
So we're kind of wrapping it up, but now you're introducing the whole another element, which is that families whose loved ones get recruited into Legionnaires of Christ, is it fair to say that they feel like a disruption of the relationship has taken place in a negative way?
In a negative way. And let me just put this out here too. The Legion of Christ has a parallel, besides being a religious order, it has a movement, a lay movement, parallel to the to the religious order group, which is called Regnum Christi. Regnum Christi. And that is supposed to have like 60,000 members worldwide. And there are degrees of affiliation into this movement, degrees of commitment to the movement. And the top echelon of these people, a lot of women, a lot of young women, are consecrated members. So they have given their life totally over to the organization. And they're, you might say, the silent majority, which we don't hear about. This is the group that is parallel to the legionaries, which would be several hundred, perhaps, consecrated. By that I mean totally dedicated, celibate women.
I was going to ask, do they get married?
Celibate men and women, celibate men and women who...
Are they like volunteers for the
They
group?
are volunteers, and they, for example, may be running schools, because the Legion has a lot of schools in the even in the Catholic in the United States, has elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, has some colleges, even a college, I believe, a couple of colleges around there now, and of course they have big universities, one big one in Rome.
Wow.
Yes, and in Mexico the Legion has several universities.
To be honest,
You
I'm
never know.
learning a lot from
Yes.
this talk this morning,
Yes.
and
yeah, this is just
there's a
hidden.
lot more
A lot
to
more out
say.
there. A lot more. We could go on forever and ever.
Yeah, but I think we're both exhausted. I'm just going to ask you if there's any last words for anyone watching this, whether it's someone who knows nothing about the organization, someone who's currently involved, someone who maybe is a former member, or any last words you'd like to share, please
Yes.
do.
Well, first of all, please not to be scared by me or by other people who speak out. We already may have a bad name for speaking out and for criticizing. But
A bad
please,
name within the group. you
within
mean,
the group,
Catholic.
within that particular group. So please go beyond that, and if you don't believe us, ask other people. Keep asking questions. Do not be afraid to ask questions, because as Jesus says, the truth will make you free. The truth will make you free. This is one of So we're just looking for the truth. Maybe I'm wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I can be wrong, but we all must seek the truth and not to be afraid to question.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks
We'll
for
be in
having
touch.
me and for allowing me to ramble on.
Well, we went longer than we had planned, but I have a feeling we could have gone for hours.
Yeah,
So, but hopefully this will pique people's interest. They'll
Yes.
go to regainnetwork.org, maybe look up Vows of Silence, maybe see the video, and if they want to talk with you, they can find you on the internet.
Absolutely.
And potentially have a consultation with you.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.